And so that's what we'll be doing for the next hour, is talking about progress monitoring and data collection. Very important for a couple of reasons. One is that it makes for better instruction. Two is it's legally required. One of the things Julie Weatherly mentioned in her session this morning is how important having data is to a school attorney. Because if you have data, from where you started, which is present levels, to where you're going to go, which is your measurable goals and your actual evaluation data, it's much easier to prove that you've indeed conferred a free, appropriate public education. So there are essentially educational and legal reasons for it. But what I want to begin with is probably one of the best reasons of all, and this is from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland from Lewis Carroll. And Alice was talking to the Cheshire Cat and said, would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here? And the cat said, that depends a good deal on where you want to get to. And Alice said, I don't much care. And the cat said, then it doesn't matter which way you go. And that, I think, is kind of a good summation of the whole purpose of progress monitoring. It starts by saying where we are, and it ends up by showing where we've gone. And without progress monitoring data, we can't conclusively prove that we've done anything. So, let me just define what progress monitoring is according to Indiana state law. Progress monitoring is a systematic procedure for frequent and repeated collection and analysis of student performance data, academic or functional performance, or both academic and functional performances, is monitored over time to evaluate the effectiveness of instruction and intervention. So, what I'm going to be talking about is kind of start generally talking about a couple different types of progress monitoring, and then I'm going to focus on a particular academic type just to show you kind of how it works and how great progress monitoring can be for including in our IEPs as present levels of performance, writing in our goals. But also progress monitoring, you can do it in pretty much everything. And I'll show you a website toward the end called the Center for Intensive Intervention, which has a wealth of progress monitoring information in pretty much all academic areas and in behavior. So, but first off, the Office of Special Ed Programs, some of you may have heard of that. It's the office within the U.S. Department of Education that is responsible for the implementation of IDEA, and they have their own definition of progress monitoring, and that is, it's a scientifically based practice that is used to assess students' academic and functional performance and evaluate the effectiveness of instruction. So if you look back, I mean, that's basically what your state regulations say progress monitoring is to be. That is the name of the center, and I'll give you the URL later that has information on that. But first off, let's talk a little bit about the benefits, the educational benefits, before we get into the legal issues. The academic benefits of progress monitoring is essentially this. When teachers use progress monitoring, their kids do better. There's no doubt kids do better when they're when we monitor progress and then make instructional decisions based on that monitoring. Excuse me. These are some researchers way back in 1986, 2009 that have compared the effects on student achievement of teachers that do use progress monitoring to teachers that don't use progress monitoring. Teachers that do use progress monitoring then would excuse me, use the data on student progress to inform their instruction. But this is what these authors found. These were teachers who didn't use progress monitoring. And if we used a standardized achievement test like the Wechsler Achievement Scale or the Woodcock-Johnson, let's just say the kids without progress monitoring scored at a 100 on that academic achievement test. In 1986, Fuchs and Fuchs showed, by looking at hundreds and hundreds of studies that compared progress monitoring to no progress monitoring, found that on similar measures, teachers who used formative evaluation, which is another word for progress monitoring, their students scored close to 130. That's a huge difference. On a standardized achievement test, if you think is 100 is average, think of an IQ test. 100 is average. 130 is gifted, or genius, some would say. That's the difference between teachers who did use progress monitoring, teachers who didn't. Then a few years later, a couple of friends of mine, Amy Reshley and Todd Bush and Stan Dino, did a study, but they just looked at reading, and they found even higher results. The teachers who used progress monitoring and reading, their kids scored above 130. So again, think of an IQ test. 100 is average. Those are the kids of the teachers who don't use progress monitoring. Over hundreds of studies, an IQ of 130 for kids that did. And that's just kind of to give you something to compare it with. In other words, we can really accelerate student learning a lot by using progress monitoring. And again, that's just to kind of help you see the difference that progress monitoring results in with kids without disabilities. These kids in 1986 learned 26%, or they did 26% better and 32% better in 2009. So it's huge effect. There is no doubt that progress monitoring makes a difference in kids' achievement. Another thing, progress monitoring is the documentation we need for accountability purposes. Julie Weatherly was talking about free, appropriate public education. And we, as we all know, special ed is the most litigated area in education. Progress monitoring is a way to document that we are effective. It's used. We can use it with when we communicate with our parents, because as we'll see, excuse me, when you do progress monitoring, the best way to do it is by graphing your progress. There's something intuitively understandable about a graph. When you look at a graph and you see a trend line going up, that's good. Everybody knows it. So it's really a good way to communicate with your parents, showing them how much their children are learning. It's excellent for accountability purposes. If you'd hope this never happened, but say there was a due process hearing and parents said, this program did not deliver FAPE. If you have the data that shows educational benefit, that's the end of the issue. Higher expectations. Here's another thing, that we know teachers that use progress monitoring tend to have higher expectations for their kids. But the bottom line is that the use of progress monitoring results in more efficient and appropriately targeted instruction and strategies and goals, which overall leads to greater instructional gains and faster attainment of educational goals. Now, essentially what you are doing by monitoring student progress is you are monitoring whether or not the instruction you're providing, which is the cause, is resulting in satisfactory academic growth. That's the effect. So, in essence, progress monitoring tells us that if our instruction's working, if we should continue our instructional strategies as we're doing them, or if we should revise them, or if a student is ready to move on to more complex skills. Now, here's an interesting thing about progress monitoring. It doesn't tell you what to teach. It tells you when your teaching isn't working or when it is working. You and the IEP team are the people who decide what to teach. The monitoring data just tells you if it's working or not. And if it's not working, you can make a change. And now, of course, that's kind of the educational reasons for doing progress monitoring. There's also the additional legal reasons for progress monitoring. It's law. We have to monitor student progress. Now, I did an interview with Matt Johnson yesterday, and one of his questions he asked down in the little interview room below I think right below our room here, is he said, why doesn't progress monitoring work, or what are the barriers to progress monitoring? There's really no barriers except knowledge. A lot of people just don't know how to do it real well, and they collect a lot of data, but it's not the most important data. But if you know what data to collect, you can be much more effective in your instruction, and for legal purposes, you can absolutely prove that you've conferred educational benefit if you have the data to show that. Now, this is what, when the IDEIA, which you know is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, was passed in 2004, that law just became part of the idea. But Congress, when they passed the law, issued a report in which they talked about the purposes of the law. And according to Congress, these were the two major purposes of IDEA 2004. One, to improve educational results for children with disabilities. And number two, to assess and ensure the effectiveness of education with children with disabilities. So when I, for instance, started teaching in special ed, right after the passage of the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, or PL 94-142, the purpose of the law was really to allow kids with disabilities to access education. Because until 1975, kids with disabilities didn't have a right to be in special ed, in a public educational setting, and a lot of school districts just refused to work with students with disabilities. Of course, that all changed in 1975 when the then Education for All Handicapped Children Act was passed, which allowed access. That now, as Julie Weatherly said, is now called the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And it's really not just about access anymore, because those battles were won 20 years ago. All kids with disabilities, no matter how severe the disability, do have access to education. But since 1997, as the law has been reauthorized, the law has really evolved to be more about accountability and about progress, about student progress. And that's essentially what Congress said. They said, 2004, the law is now about improving results. Okay, it's about assessing kids, teaching them, and ensuring that our instruction is effective. Well, how do we do that? How do we ensure our instruction is effective? Well, in 2008, regulations came out implementing the idea, and here's what the U.S. Department of Education said about that. They said, number one, the new requirements of the law emphasize the importance of using high-quality, research-based instruction in special ed settings consistent with the then No Child Left Behind. In other words, you may remember people talking about No Child Left Behind requiring that educators use scientifically based research. Well, now IDEA required the use of peer-reviewed research in our instruction. That's part of the law. Progress monitoring is a research-based procedure. Then they also said this system, this new idea that requires accountability and improved instruction and improved results, will require data-based documentation reflecting formal assessment of student progress during instruction through repeated assessments. In other words, what they were saying is we not only have to monitor progress, we have to monitor it throughout the school year. In fact, the regulations stated that students with disabilities should be monitored on every goal that we write, and that data should be reported to parents as often as students in general education get report cards. And a number of FAPE cases, or free appropriate public education cases, in which school districts have been challenged by parents because they said they did not deliver to their child a free appropriate public education, they've been challenged on that you didn't provide data that showed any progress at all, or you never collected data. That can be a real problem. So they're very important legal requirements. We have to monitor student progress and report it to parents as often as general ed kids get report cards. But there are a few cautions. There are a few cases that have examined, well, what kind of data do we need to collect? Here's an example of a case out of, called Board of Education of the Rhinebeck Central School District, cautioned against using teacher observation. How many of you have read IEPs where it says under the goal, where you have to write how it'll be monitored, it says teacher observation. This court said that's not okay. Why? Because in the words of the court, although subjective teacher observation provides valuable information, teacher observation is not an adequate method of monitoring student progress. Because without supporting data, teacher observation is opinion which cannot be verified. So teacher observation is important, but this court said it's not enough to show that you've delivered FAPE. You need data, some sort of hard evidence that your instruction is working. Just a couple others. Out of New Mexico, Escambia County, this was a state educational agency case. School district was found to not have provided FAPE, and the hearing officer wrote, the state hearing officer wrote, periodic review of progress on the goals and objectives provides the disabled student's teacher with supportive data needed to make a determination of the success of the intervention. That was not done. There was no progress monitoring data. That in itself led to a school district losing. Or being determined not to have provided FAPE. Another case, Rio Rancho Public Schools. 2 years. This was again the SEA in New Mexico. 2 years of a school district's IEPs were declared invalid. They did not provide FAPE. The parent prevailed. One of the reasons is they said the student's annual goals and objectives in each IEP simply do not contain objective criteria which permit measurement of student progress. A goal of increasing reading comprehension skills or improving decoding skills, which those IEPs had, is not a measurable goal. Even if the present levels of performance were clearly stated, which they were not, an open-ended statement the student will improve does not meet the law's requirements. That was in 2003. That was a year before the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act was passed, which even to a greater degree emphasized the fact that we have to have evidence that students are actually making progress in our programs. So, who exactly should be doing these things? Well, anyone, general ed teacher, special ed teacher, who's interested in improving educational results for children, families, administrators. Julie Weatherly talked about the importance of the administrators being the procedural person on the IEP team. They need to ensure that there is progress monitoring data being collected. So, educational reasons for doing it, kids do better. Legal reasons to do it, the law says we have to do it. And courts have rendered decisions against school districts that didn't. So, the big question then is if you know that progress monitoring increases student achievement, it's a research-based practice that's also required by law, and it's a legal requirement, what would ever stop you from doing it? Well, that was the question that Matt asked in the interview. And essentially, The only thing that stops people from doing it is that they're not sure exactly what is important data to collect. We as teachers, I was a teacher for 16 years. I collected tons of data. Most of it was useless. Didn't have anything to do with student learning. And so it's important that we do know what type of data we need to collect. Now, there are many different types of progress monitoring data. You can monitor progress in reading, in math, in behavior, communication, socialization. You can monitor progress in anything. And so clearly in the last 40 minutes or so there's not enough time to talk about all these. So what I want to do is just give you an example. There's two types and I want to talk about reading because that's a pretty easy type to do and it's easy to communicate. There's two types of progress monitoring data in reading. One is called mastery monitoring, one's called general outcome indicators. Well, the thing about general outcome indicators is you measure skills being taught over the entire year. And you use it for long-term goals. And you just measure over a year on one specific outcome. On the other hand, there is a type called mastery monitoring where you break down your reading instruction into small little goals, like we're going to teach CVC words this week, and then when they master those, we're going to go on to sight words, and we master those, and essentially you like give a unit test at each end of each unit you're going to teach. That's called mastery monitoring. That's about mastering specific skills, and actually is a name called curriculum-based assessment. But that's not what we're talking about here. I'm going to talk about what is called general outcome measurement. As I said, you have one thing you're measuring. You measure it all year long, the same thing, and it measures general goals, which in this case is reading improvement. We want the kid to be a better reader. So we're not going to look at sight words and then look at vowel, consonant, vowel words, and then this and that. We're just going to measure reading growth. Well, how do you measure reading growth? Well, one way we can do it is by using a test like the Woodcock-Johnson. Well, we're not going to do that because that takes a couple hours to test. And you can only use tests like that once every 6 months anyway. So we have to have a way that we can measure student progress. Now, the great thing about general outcome measures is that it doesn't matter what order you teach skills in. You know, like for instance, math is a hierarchical discipline where one skill builds on another. Reading, a lot of people think of it like that, as being a bunch of different skills. But it doesn't matter. When you're using general outcome indicators, you're just measuring, did they improve in reading? Not, can they sound out CVC words? Can they identify sight words? You're just looking at, do they improve in reading? Which is good, because from a legal standpoint, free appropriate public education, that's what we need to do. We need to measure these general outcomes to show that our students are progressing. Same thing in math. Instead of measuring all these different sub-skills, you just measure, are they better in math? Now, so, is the student becoming a better reader? Is the student becoming better at math? That's a general outcome measure. Now, there are many, many different types of general outcome measures, which I'm going to only talk real briefly about one, just to show you how it works. But this is how general outcome indicators work generally. And as you can see, it fits perfectly into the IEP format. The first thing you do in general outcome measurement is you gather data on student performance. That is, like baseline data, how is the child doing right now at the beginning of the year? And that data can become your present levels of performance statement, which I'll show you. And having a baseline to show where a student began, there's no better way to prove to a court or a hearing officer that you conferred benefit to show them where they were, to show the hearing officer or judge where you were at the beginning of the year and where you are now. The thing about general outcome measurement is we take that data that we collected at first in the present levels, and we determine what is a good amount of growth. How far can we expect the student to get in 1 year's time, or until we measure? That's our measurable annual goal. And then, just like the IDEA regulation said, we continue measuring during the course of instruction, at least as often as general ed kids get report cards. And we report that progress to parents. And we put that data on graphs. In essence, what we are doing when we're doing general outcome measurements is we are collecting the vital signs of a student's educational growth. A couple years ago, I went to a doctor because I was having knee problems. And what do you suppose the first thing, I called the doctor, the nurse, and I said, you know, I'm really having knee problems. I'm having a hard time walking. I got to come in and have it checked out. Okay, made an appointment, went in to check it out. What's the first thing that you suppose happened when I got to the doctor's office? Any of you ever been to a doctor's office? What's the first thing that happens? Get on the scale. You get on the scale, weigh yourself. Take your pulse. Take your blood pressure. Now, that didn't have anything to do with my knee. What did that have to do with? My basic state of physical health. Because what doctors do is my doctor has my blood pressure, my pulse rate, my height, my weight, and he has a baseline when I went to the doctor. And if something, even if I'm coming in for something wrong with my knee, if suddenly he sees, uh-oh, blood pressure's up, he does something about it. So in essence, a doctor is monitoring your physical health and then reacting to the data. That's what we're doing in general outcome measurement. We're measuring the child's educational health and then reacting to the data. Now, important thing about that is, well, you know, in physical health, it's pretty easy. Weight, blood pressure, all those kind of issues we know what those are. It's a little more difficult in education because we first have to decide what we're going to measure. And here is the real beauty of general outcome measures as opposed to the other types. Because the assessments, the general outcome measures, there's 25 years of evidence about what the most effective measures of a student's educational health is. Well, one of the things we can do, like I said, is give them the Woodcock-Johnson or the Woodcock Reading Mastery, and that gives you good data, but you can't do that if you're a teacher because you can only give them every 6 months, and who wants to spend 2 hours for one kid testing? So we have got to have certain indicators of educational health, just like doctors have indicators of physical health. And the first characteristic is they got to be reliable and valid. Reliable means it says the same thing time and time again. Valid means it's truthful. So if a doctor wants to monitor my health, they take blood pressure, when they know that's a very important indicator of a person's health, is what their blood pressure is. We need reliable and valid indicators of children's educational health. Another thing we need, and this is very important in terms of education, is we have to have measures that are sensitive to student growth on a very short-term basis. Because remember, at the minimum, we've got to be doing this every 4.5 weeks. If you give interim report cards, the law says you've got to monitor progress on that same rate. I mean, if you give interim report cards to kids without disabilities. So we've got to be able to give it at the very least, say every month. And we've got to give it the next month, and the next month, next month. But we need to have something that's sensitive to growth, that shows when our students are actually improving, it shows up in the data that we collect. Third thing we need, something that is time efficient. Like I said, I taught for 16 years, and you can't take 2 hours to collect data. You've got to have something, boom, that's quick, that you can get real quick, that's reliable and valid. But it's got to be time efficient, and it's got to be repeatable. You've got to be able to do it over and over again. Any of you give standardized norm reference tests like the Woodcock-Johnson? What happens if you give them every other week? They don't mean anything because the kid learns them. So clearly, we have to have something that we can do over and over again that doesn't matter if the kid will not learn that test. So it has to be repeatable, has to be very easy to administer because we're busy teachers, we're busy all the time, we don't have a lot of time to spend. As I told Matt too, they have to be easy to collect, easy to train teachers to do them, easy to teach folks to do them. And they have to be real easy to understand and explain, because we have to explain to parents how their child is progressing in whatever area in which we're working. Now, I want you to look at this. Does anybody recognize this? Mothers in this audience should know what this is. It's a heightened growth chart. You see them in all doctors' offices. They're height and weight, stature and weight by age, going up here. And notice the general line of curve or trend in these growth charts. They obviously increase. And what doctors can do is they can weigh your child and they can say, oh, well, let's see, they're 55 pounds and they're 10 years old, and they can see how they compare with the rest of the population. Look at this. This is a reading chart that shows reading growth in the first 6 years of school. 50th percentile yellow, 25th is green, 75th. Look at the similarity between these two. It's basically the same thing. Here, in terms of reading, this is how they've grown. This is actually a measure that I'm going to be talking about called oral reading fluency, where you just ask kids to read to you 1 minute, count the words they read. If they're in the 75th percentile, they're here. 50th, 25th. Of course, most art kids are going to be here or even down here. But the important thing about this is we know how much growth we can expect from normally achieving students, better than normal achieving students, and low achieving students, because there is data that shows that. Now, this measure is a simple measure called oral reading fluency. And this is the example I'm going to use to show you how we monitor progress. Now, oral reading fluency, this is all you do. It has to be easy, has to be something you do, repeatable. Every week, or you could do it every other week, but I always did it when I was a teacher. I did it actually 3 times a week because it's so easy to collect this. And what we know from progress monitoring research is the more you collect, the better information you get. Every week, student reads aloud to you for 1 minute, and you count the words they've read aloud. That's it. That is the best measure of reading growth there is. Nothing's better than that. Read this passage for 1 minute, you count the words, boom, graph them, you've got the perfect data for showing reading growth. Important thing is, I want to give students that, say I'm working with Jeremy, I want to give him the same level all the time. I don't want to say give him one day out of the first grade reading book, and the next day out of the 6th grade reading book, and the third day out of the 4th grade reading book. Why wouldn't I want to do that? Because his performance is going to be real variable. It can be all over the place. When I have him reading a 1st grade reader, he's going to do great. When he gets to the 6th grade reader, he's going to do horrible. So the passages basically have to be the same. They have to be like, so if he's reading in 2nd grade passages, I need to have him reading always 2nd grade passages because I can show growth that way. Essentially, it's like this. You get a copy, student gets a copy, you ask the kid to read for a minute, you mark the correct words, and then you put it on a graph. That's it. Boom. You've got your progress monitoring data. all you need. That's the most perfect measure of reading ability we have because it meets all those criteria. It's easy to administer, it's easy to learn, it's practical, it's reliable, it's valid, time efficient. Now, one of the things that people always say, well, how about you're asking me to measure oral reading fluency. I just need to get them to be faster readers. No, we're not really interested in them being faster readers. We're also not interested in specific sub-skills, like do they know their Dolch sight words, or can they sound out CVC words. We're interested just in an overall score, ORF, oral reading fluency score. This is what we know about oral reading fluency measures and why they're so good. As kids improve in oral reading fluency, they become better decoders. When kids improve in oral reading fluency, they have higher vocabulary, more sight words. And when kids improve, and this is really important, when kids improve in oral reading fluency, they are better comprehenders. They understand more of what they're reading. I mean, the research is real clear on that. That is a great measure of reading improvement. And also it correlates highly with global measures of reading, like the Woodcock-Johnson Reading Mastery, or the Woodcock Reading Mastery Test, Woodcock-Johnson Psychoeducational Battery Stanford Test. All of those have been tested against oral reading fluency. Oral reading fluency gives you as good or better data than any norm reference test does. And think of how easy it is to do. 1 minute a day. So here's what we look for in oral reading fluency. We want the scores to go up. That indicates they're becoming better readers, better decoders, better comprehenders, have better sight words. But on the other hand, if we're giving them oral reading fluency tests and they're flat, what does that indicate? Or maybe they're going down. What does that indicate? That indicates they're not improving or profiting from our instruction. And what we have to do then is we have to change instruction. And there's the essence of the accountability piece. That oral reading fluency data tells us if our instruction's working. If we test them once a week, 1 minute a day, and that data is going up, great, they're learning. If that data is staying the same or going down, what we're doing isn't working. That data, that's the thing that Fuchs and Reschle shows makes us better teachers, because our students are more likely to progress. Now again, it doesn't tell us what we need to change. That's where our expertise as teachers come in. It just tells us we need to change. It's a vital sign of educational health. It's like taking the child's blood pressure. Oral reading fluency, it gives you an important measure. This is an example of a graph, of an oral reading fluency graph that starts here. You can, by the way, in oral reading fluency, you can make your present level of performance and you can write your annual goal. So this is an example of a graph where it started there, present levels. That was the goal we connected to. That's called an aim line. That's where we wanted to get. And then we keep measuring. Well, look at this child is way up here. Man, he's already above the aim line. That looks like he's going to make the goal. That's called, by the way, the trend line. So that data is telling us what we're doing is working. What we're doing is working. Now, another important thing, though, in oral reading fluency or whatever type of progress monitoring data you use is where can you get the materials to test? Well, there's lots of places available that have really good materials. Some of them cost money. Has anybody have a school district that uses Ames Web? You do? Oh, okay. We do. A couple of our school districts in South Carolina does. It's kind of expensive, but it gives you all the data you need. All the data you need. And it has the materials you need to test. There's another one called Ed Checkup. There's a Dibbles website. They have data that you need. But here's the cool ones, free ones. Intervention Central. Anybody ever heard of that? They have something called the Data Warehouse. They have all the materials you need. this is my favorite. It's called easycbm.com. Has anybody ever used that? Yeah, it's a fabulous program. It's free. Say if I have a 4th grade student and I'm saying, well, I'm going to need to test them all year, they've got the reading materials for me by grade level. They've got math progress monitoring, spelling progress monitoring, just about every kind of progress monitor you want. And by the way, Intervention Central also has behavior data, but you can get all the materials you need, because if you're going to be testing a child once a week in oral reading fluency, you need passages. 1 week you do this passage that are on the same grade level. So 1 week you do this passage, then I go into EasyCBM, get the 2nd weeks, 3rd weeks, 4th weeks, 5th weeks, and at some point you can start over. Research shows probably about 15, 20 passages have gone by. You can go back to the first one again because they don't remember it. So all the materials you need are right here, free. Go to www.easycbm.com, sign up, put your name, totally free. They also sell it to school districts for use of all their kids. But if you as a teacher have 30, 40 kids, I hope you don't have that many, you can use it for free. And it graphs the data for you. It's great. In fact, these are the different types of information. They have reading, which is reading aloud from tests. They have spelling. They have writing. They have mathematics. They have algebra. They have geometry. Just all sorts of progress monitoring tools. They also have a really good explanation PDF that tells you how to use the system. But let's talk specifically about oral reading fluency. Source of passages. Like I said, you could use school curriculum. When I was teaching, we had what were called basal textbooks. So if I had a 2nd grade student, I would just go and pull like the 3rd grade basal text. I didn't want to use the same book he was reading in because I might get the same passage he was reading. So I went to 3rd grade and I would randomly pick a page out of the middle of the text or the end or the beginning, Xerox a copy for me, Xerox a copy for the student, give him his copy, ask him to read for 1 minute, count the words correct. Or you could use library books or trade books, but the problem is you don't really know what the reading level is, and you want to get that same reading level all the time. Or you can use these generic passages like EasyCBM or Intervention Central or Ames WebHub. They're very good. Now, in terms of measuring the oral reading fluency, here's how you do it. You need those materials, you need to give the kid directions, and you need to have scoring rules. And you probably need a pencil and a stopwatch, or a sweep hand, a minute hand on a clock. This is what you do. You just take a copy. Say I got some off CBM. 4th grade reading. Give a copy to my student. I take a copy. I get a pen out and a watch or a timer, or use your timer in your iPhone or whatever, and you have the administrative slip or script. And then you say to the student, when I say please begin, start reading aloud at the top of this page. Read across the page, demonstrate by pointing. Try to read each word. I'll tell it. If you don't know it, I'll tell it to you. If you get to the end of the page, start over. Be sure to do your best reading. Any questions? Please begin. Boom. 1 minute. Count them. You're done. You've got all your data collected. Then what you do is you follow along on your timer, with your timer. If a student fails to say a word, you give it to them. If for 3 seconds they don't have a word, you give it to them. Why? Because kids will keep on trying to sound it out, and their whole minute will go that way. So after 3 seconds, give them a word, follow along, mark the words that are wrong, and at the end of 1 minute, say stop, count them up. Then there are the rules. You don't have to, these are just rules like if they repeat words, you only count one of them. If there's omissions, if they just forget a word, you count that as wrong. Those kind of things. And again, you don't let them hesitate for more than 3 minutes. And you have to, then you just go and score it. You just count the words they had correct. And you do it over and over and over again. You repeatedly sample them. You've got to use a new passage each time. And the passages have to be the same level, and it has to be cold. In other words, you don't say, Jeremy, we're going to test you now. You can practice for a couple minutes, because you don't get an honest measure then of their real ability, because they're practicing. So each reading has to be cold. And again, and I said this before, they have to be passages of consistent difficulty, because, and it's hard to determine. There's things called readability formula, but it takes a long time. You just want to use some, like Easy CBM, Intervention Central. You just go to them. They've already figured all that stuff out for you. So you'll know what the reading level is. And then you just do it again. The next thing you do in progress monitoring, whatever area you're doing it in, is you write a graph. You create a graph. Well, creating a graph is really pretty easy, and they are the most, parents love graphs. They're intuitively understandable. And what I've done is I've stuck a little graph paper on everybody's thing, but so you can look at it, but it's easy to do. You just make a vertical line, and then you number it. If you're doing correct oral reading fluency, you start at 0 and go up to 100, for instance. And then on the horizontal line, you have every week noted. Maybe you have dates because you want to do it 3 times a week. But let's say every week noted. That's all you need to do to make a graph. So what I want everybody to do is take that piece of paper and make a graph that looks like that. Vertical, words read correct, 0 to 100. Horizontal, weeks of instruction, 1 to whatever. You know, it's usually 32 weeks or so in a school year. So just take a few seconds and make a graph like that. Now, after you're done with your graph, what I want you to do is we're going to graph Alex's present level of performance. I gave Alex oral reading fluency tests, 5 of them in the first 2 weeks of the school year. And these were the results. He got 42, 28, 52, 47, 48. So I want you to graph those 5 data points. So the 42 would be like here. 1, find the intersection of 1 and about 42, make a little dot there. Then for the 52, go over a little bit, go up to 52, make a little dot there. And same until you get all 5 done. Or 28 actually was the next one. Now, one of the things we do in progress monitoring is you connect the dots. The first reading was 42. You connect that to the second reading, and then connect that to the third reading, 52, and then connect that to 47 and 48. And when you're done, that would be a baseline, because we have to have a baseline. That's our present levels of performance. So what you do then is you just take and draw a vertical line at the end of the last reading, all the way up, and you figure out what his median performance was. Now, who knows what the median performance is there? 47. Because it's the middlemost score. You just take and put the top score up here, down to the bottom score, take the one in the middle. You don't use mean for this, because all you know from graphing data is if he's got a really high or low, that'll disrupt the mean. So the median is the best measure. So the median is 47. So in 1 minute of reading, he read 47 words correct. And you know what? You've got your present levels of performance statement. And that provides the basis for everything else in the IEP. And let me just show you. This is how we wrote the present levels of performance statement for Alex. Given randomly selected passages from grade 4 reading curriculum, Alex currently reads at 47 correct words per minute. That is a baseline. That would meet any legal scrutiny. because you have a figure that tells you exactly what he's reading at. And it's a reliable and valid figure. Oral reading fluency. And now the cool thing about this is you can now write measurable annual goals based on that. And the way you do that is you take the median, which was 47, and then you got to figure out, well, how fast do I want Alex to grow in 1 year's time? Well, you can kind of make an educated guess. You can say, well, you know, all the other fourth graders are reading at about 120 words, and that could be your goal. Or there's been research that is collected, and this is from easycbm.com, that tells you exactly what his rate of improvement should be if he's learning. Alex is in fourth grade. Here's what we know. An ambitious goal for a fourth grade student is 1.1 words gained per week. If he's in second grade, 2.0. Because if he's in sixth grade, under 1 word. That research shows us that is a good way to figure out how far we want Alex to be in a year. Either choose your realistic rate of growth, 1 word per week, or fourth grade, 0.85 is realistic, 1.1 is ambitious. So you take the number of weeks times the number of weeks in the school year, 36, and add that number to the 47 where he started. That's your annual goal. You've got your annual goal. Then you can graph your annual goal, put it in the IEP, and this is what it looks like. So let's say Alex was here, and this is where we want him to be. Now this is only not even 14 weeks, but if we wanted to extend it out to 36 weeks, it'd be up here someplace. And for that student, that's his annual goal. That's his goal statement. Given randomly selected passage from grade 4 reading curriculum, Alex will read 84 words per minute. And that is a research-based annual goal in reading that is based on 25 years of research that show in oral reading fluency. Then the last thing you have to do is monitor his progress. You just keep doing this once a week, once every 2 weeks or so. And you make decisions based on how Alex is doing. Say, okay, now what? I'm collecting the data. Now what do I do? Say, is my student progressing at an acceptable rate? At the rate he's going, does he look like he's going to make his goal? If he's not, do I change instruction? And if I do change instruction and I continue to collect that data once a week, is the child doing better? Is he starting to learn now? So I want to show you, by the way, there's computer graphing programs. Ames Web will do this, make a computerized graph for you. It'll draw a graph for you. You don't even have to do it yourself. You enter the data and it'll put it on its graph. You have got a perfect way to show the student is growing. Legally, would meet muster in any court in the law in the land. Plus, it really informs your parents. Now, teachers can create their own graphs too, but let's just go up and take a look at a couple graphs. These are just examples. There's the goal line. Here's where he's reading. You look at the last 4 points. How is he doing? How is Alex doing? Does it look like he's doing well? Yeah, it does. There's his goal. He's already up there. So that tells me my instruction's working. But what if it looks like this? What if my 4 most recent points are down here? What does that say? My instruction isn't working. Something's got to change. It doesn't tell you what to change. It just says something has to change. You have to add something. You have to change something if you want to make that goal. And it's very easy. They're very easy. Just look at the most recent 4 points. If they're below the goal line, change instruction. If they're above the goal line, you could raise the goal or just keep what you're doing, and that works great too. Now, I put a lot of other things on data decision-making rules and an example if you want to do that. But here's some examples. You show this to a parent What are they, what does this tell you? Okay, look at the last 4. He was doing well, but he's not doing as well now. I got to change something. Or, here's another one. Now, what does that tell us? That's not good. Or he's not doing very well at all. Something's got to change real quick. That's one of the reasons people, researchers like people to collect more data, because if I'm just doing this once a week and I wait for 4 weeks, well, that's 4 weeks gone. But if I wait for 8 weeks, that's a lot of the school year's already gone. He's not learning. So the more data he can get, the better. So that's why it's best to collect it once a week or even more. Just a couple more examples. So remember, progress monitoring, what is it? It's just collecting data on student progress in whatever area you're teaching. I use the example of oral reading fluency for reading. It's a perfect way to measure reading, but you can have data in math, spelling, algebra, anything. Look on EasyCBM, it's all there. Why? Because you'll be a better teacher because you collect data and react to the instruction. It's like a scientist does. They collect data and they react to it. That's what we're going to be doing. You collect data, react to what the data is telling you. It's easy to do, and the most important reason, of course, is our kids will do better. Secondary reason is it makes your IEP legally bulletproof if you have data that shows the kids are working. And as I said, Indiana is much more specific in their language, in their regulations. Here's just a couple examples, real-life examples from students over close to a year's time. And you can see how important it is. Now, so the big question is, if you know that student progress monitoring increases in student achievement, and it's a research-based practice, and it's a legal requirement, what would stop you from doing it? The only thing that should stop you is if you don't know how to do it. And we have access to a whole bunch of information. Like I said, easycbm.com, Intervention Central, and National Center for Intensive Interventions. That's the URL. Great site. Just a wealth of information on any of those sites. I would say go to that one. Go to easycbm.com. Intervention Central, they have all types of progress monitoring. We talked about reading. They've got everything, including behavior. Bottom line, better performance in your kids, perfect accountability in your IEPs. So these are a few references, and otherwise it's the end of the day. So thank you very much. If you have any questions or anything, I have my email. I'll be glad to answer, send you any resources you need. But do look at easycbm.com. Everything's there you really need. And then the Intervention Central. So thank you very much.